no loss.
Okay. So with that, thank you all for coming today. My name is Kevin Eschelbach. I'm with the Central Vermont Chamber of Commerce. This is part of our ongoing business assistance series, Smarts and Sense. It seemed timely to talk about cybersecurity, since there's a lot of talk about that in the news and how there's kind of an increased threat a bit due to the war. So we are grateful to have Ruben Bennett of RB Technologies here to present today and talk about cybersecurity. Take it away.
All right. Well, welcome all. Thanks for taking some time out of your busy days to listen to me talk for a little bit. I've prepared a 400-slide slide deck with should take us probably 3 or 4 hours, and we'll be good to go. Kidding. So I'm going to share my screen after I start my presentation. Can everybody see my screen? I'm seeing thumbs up. Excellent. So in all seriousness, this is like, cybersecurity is a huge topic. We can geek out for days. So this is going to be like a super glossy, barely scratch the surface presentation here. Turn my heat down. So here we are. So a little background on me. I started RB Technologies in my basement in 1997. We're a managed service provider that many of you are probably familiar with if you've been in the area. We provide IT support and services to a whole bunch of different companies. And one of our strong focus is security, which is more important every day. I started off as a IT administrator for a bike shop in Phoenix, Arizona. That was where my IT career started. I went off and was an Oracle database admin. And for a very long time, I did not use Windows at all because of the security and reliability concerns. I have too many hobbies that take me out of work. I volunteer a lot on local boards. I'd love to be outside. It's Vermont, who doesn't? But there's a list of some of the things that I can be found doing, and just because it's my latest current obsession, I included an action shot of me trying not to tip over on the Deerfield driveway last fall. So, IT security, it's great. It's finally top of mind. People, like regular people, business owners, insurers, folks on the street are actually starting to pay attention a little bit to the issues around cybersecurity. Those of us who have worked in IT for any amount of time have been beating our heads on this for our entire careers, trying to get people to understand why it's important. Why you need to adopt better practices, why, frankly, you as a business owner need to spend some money on security. And as the Russian-Ukraine conflict has sort of launched into top of mind, nation-state hacking is happening. It's out there. And on top of the actual frontline war that's going on, there's this entire subtext of cyber warfare going on. So there's information, misinformation, there's attacks on nation state targets, there's attacks on departments and governments. There's in the news, everybody's seen the headlines. UVM Health got absolutely devastated by a cybersecurity attack. There's stories all over. Couple of quick ones. I had a client who was a real estate agent. This was many years ago. He got a very grumpy email from a client saying, why are you basically abusing me into changing the account that I wire this settlement money to? Turned out that somebody had gotten into his Gmail account from Cape Town, South Africa, and was working very hard to get the client to change where they sent the money. Had they actually been successful and had the client not gotten a little suspicious and called the agent, they would have been out the settlement. This has happened, this sort of financial crime is a pretty common one, where you get into somebody's email, impersonate them, or don't even get into their email, but impersonate them. And basically get somebody to do something that they shouldn't, usually because you pressure them, and then money gets stolen. So who's worried about this? One of the interesting things is that in the last couple of years, fiduciaries and governing boards have gotten increasingly worried about cybersecurity, mostly because they're on the hook for the financial side of when a loss happens. Completely related to that, and part of the downward pressure, is that the insurers are super tired of paying out on these claims. So for you, it means that you should also definitely be concerned about these types of attacks. So this slide has two columns. One is breaches on the left, and the other is incidents. A breach is defined as an unauthorized, illegal access of a system or the system's information. An incident is an attempted breach, or it's some action that results in a system being disabled or otherwise inaccessible. Or more simply, it's just a violation of an organization's information security policy, which every organization should have. The most common breach methods, the left side, are social engineering and attacks on web applications. The most common incident type, that's the right side, is a denial of service, where basically a system is just made unavailable for whatever reason. Denial of service attacks are mostly an inconvenience. They don't actually compromise the system itself. They just take it offline and make it unavailable for a time. And they are often pretty effectively mitigated with services like Cloudflare. Services like Cloudflare also do a good job, in addition to doing traffic throttling and the like. They can do some packet inspection and traffic inspection and actually peel off some pretty common web application attacks. So since we're here, the catalyst for this presentation and conversation is the worry about state-sponsored hacking. Sorry, got a slide ahead of myself. So drill into this a little bit farther. The thing that really should stand out at all of us is the fact that 85% of breaches, so breaches mean a compromised system, involve a human error. Ultimately, that means that human error or somebody was tricked into doing something that they shouldn't have. 61% involved credentials. So when you bridge those two together, it means somebody got tricked into giving their credentials to somebody that they shouldn't have. And then you can see the statistics for ransomware. Not to say that ransomware isn't a problem, it's a huge problem. But only 13% of breaches involved actual ransomware. So the takeaway from this is that the people behind the keyboards are really the biggest risk factor. So these are the motivators for these cyber crimes. Financial gain is far and away the most common motivator. Um, let's see. State hacking is generally interested in sowing division and discontent. Not to downplay the risk, and I don't want to say that you shouldn't protect your systems. Of course, you absolutely should protect your systems, but generally speaking, state level hackers are not looking to compromise small businesses, especially in central Vermont. Is it possible that you'll get, that your collateral damage in a larger attack? Absolutely. Should you protect yourself and take proper cyber hygiene? Of course. We're certainly not recommending that you don't, but I think it's important to keep the risk in sort of scope and scale to what's out there, and say that that financial gain is that's what people are after. They're looking to do financial damage or steal money. So one of the interesting pieces out of the Ukraine conflict is big tech's role in this whole world. They are the big tech companies, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Apple. They are super grappling with how to deal with this because they provide services to both sides of this conflict. And the question boils down to them, like how are they supposed to respond to this? And there is no easy answer to this. They can shut Russia off, and that arguably may be the right thing to do, but there are arguments that would counter that as well. So there's big tech is really grappling with this, and as we're seeing with this conflict, it's really pressing these bigger questions of what do the sanctions mean, like how do they implement them in a way that makes sense, in a way that doesn't up the human scale of the tragedy, etc. I'm going to pivot off to another pretty well publicized hack that happened last year, which is Log4j. This was all over the news at the end of last year. A lot of enterprise IT departments had a long series of really crappy days trying to identify whether or where they had these libraries configured and running on their networks, and whether they were vulnerable to the Log4j hack. This was another one of those pieces where lots of enterprise companies use bits of software that they don't necessarily disclose. And so when there's a vulnerability found in one of those where they disclose it like way deep down in their terms of service, it becomes a super hard mess for everybody to clean up, because you have to identify, sometimes manually by like digging down through the code base, to see if these applications are running and where and whether they're in a vulnerable way. The good news is that for most small businesses, Log4j is not part of the service delivery ecosystem, and or it is used, but it's part of a broader vertical stack of applications that you might subscribe to, and that the administration is taken care of as part of your monthly service agreement. One of the points on this slide is, again, the big motivator is financial. And so one of the real bummers about Log4j is that these enterprises have deep pockets and they have good insurance. So they make a really good target for financial and information crimes. So there's a huge trend of moving to the cloud. We were a little slow at RB Tech to do this. I am inherently pretty distrustful of applications and systems that I don't run. I know that that means that I have, or my company has, responsibility. But in our estimation for a really long time, I didn't have good confidence in the administration of these big cloud systems. For a number of years, my reservations were borne out, where there were huge outages in the Google Cloud Suite, and there were huge, long extended outages in the Microsoft 365 suite. And it was only after we saw the actual user experience go up and those unscheduled outages start to slope off, which they seem to be happening again a little bit more, that we started helping people move to the cloud and actually encouraging it. Because today, there are systems that it just doesn't make sense to run on your own, especially as a small business. When you look at the capital expense of like building infrastructure and putting it together and then maintaining it, and you bridge that up against an operational expense that just goes into that column and sits there every month. From a cash flow and financial management perspective, oftentimes these cloud services really make a pretty compelling case. If you're considering moving to the cloud, there are a couple of things that we recommend. Definitely do implement two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication. Definitely do use strong, unique passwords. And definitely do use password management and unique passwords for all systems. Don't reuse the same password over and over again. And I'll hammer on this point a little farther in a minute. Oops. Do not use default settings, particularly in the Microsoft Office 365 and Google Workspace tenants. They are out of the gate, they're not strong enough. And there are settings that you'll want to turn up and enable. Unless you really know what you're doing, we recommend pretty strongly against deploying your own tenant, meaning that you just kind of go and set it up on your own. There are a lot of toggles and switches and dials in those tenants that you can change and that you should change. And there are a whole bunch of them that you probably don't want to and that have lots of unintended consequences. Do not allow weak passwords and do not have shared admin credentials to the degree that you can. So this is a recent experience. Security, unfortunately, is still often an afterthought. So I had to access the business services, the Social Security Administration website earlier this month. And to this day, I only have an 8-character password on that website. And it stood out to me enough that I actually screenshotted it and sort of blew up this piece here. 8 characters is an absurdly short password. It is not going to stand up to modern cryptography. And here's how this password is going to fare. This particular graphic went sort of viral last month. These guys post something similar to this every year, and there are companies that do these analysis on a pretty regular basis. But we triangulate. We can look at an 8-character password, and the criteria for that password was upper and lowercase letters and numbers. So if you drag over, that's 7 minutes for modern systems to be able to brute force that password. That's just not long enough. That means that an unfettered attack on that password or on that password hash is going to guess your password in a matter of minutes. You really want to be somewhere down in this green zone. That's our recommendation. And what that really translates to is you're probably not going to be able to remember that password. Which leads me to one of my main points. Please, please, please use a password manager. It is not possible. It's not realistic. It's not feasible to remember a unique password for all of the different systems that you're going to log into on a regular basis. So as humans, what we like to do is just use the same password. Maybe it's a strong password. The problem with that is that if any one of those systems that you use gets compromised, then it compromises all of the systems that use that same password, right? So if you use the same password for Google and Apple and Facebook or whatever, and LinkedIn gets got again, then If you use that same password, then all of those logins have to be changed. Where if you use strong, unique passwords, then you've only been compromised in the one place and you only have to change the one password. This is a screenshot of Bitwarden, which is an open source and paid password manager. You can go online and use Bitwarden. LastPass is another one that most people have heard of. It's sort of all over the place. 1Password is another commercial password manager. And then KeePass is one that is an application that you can download that is actually free and open source. If you don't need access to your passwords from anywhere, meaning that you just have your passwords on your system, then KeePass is a great option. As we said before, ultimately end users are the main risk. It's usually, going back to that slide a handful of slides ago, 85% of the time, human error is at play in a breach. So means that somebody got tricked into entering their credentials on a fake login screen, or they responded to a fake email who purports to be from somebody that it wasn't actually from, or sensitive information was sent in an email and was intercepted along the way. Or, and this is a pretty common one too, or you got tricked into giving personal and sensitive information out on an incoming phone call. Not to sound pessimistic, but I'm going to sound pessimistic. You will be targeted. Everybody's going to be targeted. You've probably already been targeted in one of those ways. So how do you protect yourself? One of the overarching things to remember, there's like 2 or 3 major points. One of them is use a password manager. The second one is never click links in emails unless you are absolutely sure it's a trustworthy link. You can hover over the link and see if it goes where it says that it's going, but that is the #1 way that you get your credentials snipped. And then if you punch your credentials into a fraudulent fake login box, it's a literal race at that point between you and the hacker to see who can get into the account faster. So best way to avoid that is to be very sure that you don't click links in emails. Phone calls, that's basic social engineering is what that is. It's on the uptick. And the most common things are, you know, I need your social security, or I need your checking account number, or whatever that sensitive information is. So a way to protect yourself against this, again, going back to an email, is never call the number that either the caller or an email specifies. So if somebody calls saying that they're from Capital One Bank and you have a Capital One card, then you call the phone number on the back of the card or on your statement. Don't call the number that they give you. If somebody is actually legit, they will be able to give you a ticket number. You'll be able to call in, navigate their phone tree, give the ticket number to an appropriate person, and get back to the person that was trying to talk to you. And they will likely be completely okay with you doing that, because that is you demonstrating that you take your personal privacy and security seriously. So there are 2 types of countermeasure. There are technical countermeasures, which I've talked about some already: strong unique passwords, multi-factor authentication, up-to-date antivirus systems, patches, operating system. Don't use, you know, Windows XP. Keep the firewall and all those systems up to date. This one, use only encrypted wireless connections. I would recommend pretty strongly that you not use open wireless networks. That means that anybody who is on that network can intercept anything that goes over that network that is transmitted in an unencrypted way. Even if you're on a public network at like a coffee shop that has a shared password, that is a substantial increase in security over a straight up open wireless network. all of the packets then are at least encrypted and decrypted by the wireless access point and your laptop. So they're much harder to get into. Human countermeasures, use a password manager. We love the phrase here, use a healthy dose of paranoia. It's a little bit of a cynical phrase, but it basically says just be suspicious. Don't hesitate to ask questions. Don't hesitate to challenge people that are asking you, especially if they're pressuring you for information, because the game usually boils down to pressuring people to do things in a moment when they shouldn't. And so if you get your defenses down, then you're much more likely to make a mistake. Don't email sensitive information. Don't click links. Don't be in a hurry. Trust your gut. If something feels off, it's probably off. And if it's not off, then you'll be able to figure it out if you give yourself a little bit of time. And when in doubt, delete. If it's legit, the email can be resent. How do I protect my organization? So we've talked quite a bit about how to protect yourself. So this is, a bunch of business owners on this call. These are the basics. You should have a firewall. There are some settings that you can turn on most firewalls, except for the really consumer grade ones, where you can block regions. You can say, okay, you know what? You can't log onto this in any way, shape, or form. You can't even communicate with this device from IP addresses that resolve back to Russia or Belarus or wherever. Intrusion detection and intrusion prevention. I left abbreviations that I probably shouldn't have. Single sign-on is a great one for a little bit of a mid-sized business. So if you have an Active Directory domain, then it's a great idea to just link everything that you possibly can back to that logon. Then if you need to shut something off for some reason, you have one place to do it. Disable that account and it's off everywhere. People, cybersecurity training, doing things like this, upping your understanding of the threat landscape and your understanding of the countermeasures that you can, that are under your control. Application protection, to be completely honest, I'm not sure what I meant about that. Oh, no, I do know what I meant about that. Application protection means don't have things published that you don't need to have published out to the internet. So if you've got an internal application that's like a website or an intranet or something, unless you really need it to be accessible from outside of the building, don't make it accessible from outside of the building. Device protection, that's same basic practice. Update everything. You should be able to locate, remote wipe, lock any mobile device that connects to your company assets. Grok, the two kinds of security controls. Grok is just a nerdy word for understand. But there are basically two families of controls. We talk a lot about technical controls. Put in a firewall, put in an IDS, put in a spam filter, antivirus, patching, all that good stuff. Small businesses in particular tend to really overlook the administrative controls. And what I mean by administrative controls are, those are the organizational policies and practices that drive everything, including the technical controls. So if you have a mobile device policy that says you cannot access company resources from a privately owned mobile device, then you have an easy answer to when somebody comes up and asks if they can use their personal cell phone to access their Microsoft 365 account. The answer is no. If you decide that that's allowed, then in your mobile device policy, you should have what the guidelines around that are. You can say, yes, we allow those. Here are the conditions. We're going to enable remote wipe location and locking of the device. We're going to enable certain policies that say you have to have a strong password on the phone's lock screen, that you can't have your lock screen disabled. All of those things that make it so that you're taking good care of your company's information. Incident response plan. This is all like planning, right? What do you do if something goes wrong? It's way better to figure that out when you're not in an emergency situation and something has gone wrong than to try and figure it out in the moment. That is the worst possible time to try and figure out what your incident response plan is during an incident. Backup continuity and disaster planning. Backups. You've got to have backups. They have to be good backups. And you have to have a conversation and expectations internally for how your backups and your backup response plan reflects different situations that might come up. So, you know, we talk a lot, like, say the building burns down. Okay, well, we've got offsite backups and this is how they work. Okay, what happens if you have a ransomware incident? You have to walk through all of those different scenarios. You're not going to get through them all, but at least the broad strokes so that you have a clear understanding of what your response will be. Okay, you know, I have a ransomware incident. We have an air-gapped backup that's over here that a ransomware attack can't touch. It's offline, and it gets updated once a week. So your recovery point and recovery time objectives all have to be part of this. User training is part of the administrative control. It's where you try to minimize the human element of the risk. And risk management is assessing your risk and deciding what you do about the different pieces. And there's a whole world of risk management strategies that we're not going to go into today. The other piece, obviously, I have a bias here since I'm an IT professional. So this is not unbiased advice, but you know, this is what we do. We see new creative ways for breaches to happen. We see new stuff left, right, and center. We learn new things every day, and we make new mistakes every day. So, you know, I joke, we learn new things every day, and we've seen it all, except for the new things that we learn every day. And for modern IT companies, security should be second nature. It actually should should be completely enveloped in everything that an IT company does. Unfortunately, there are still lots of companies around that is not the case. And so at the end of the day, you really want to talk to somebody that you trust, and don't be afraid to ask questions. We will never make fun of anybody who asks even the most basic question, because it means that you're there and you want to understand. I was going to run a demo of Have I Been Pwned, but I think I'm going to leave that and suggest that everybody check out the website Have I Been Pwned, and I will post that in the chat once we get to the end of this and we hit the question and answer, and if somebody can remember or can remind me to do that, that would be awesome. So some simple things that you can do from a protect yourself perspective. We recommend Proofpoint. Proofpoint is email filtering and link checking. One of the really clever things that Proofpoint does, and this will work with Office 365 or any other email provider, is they do link transformation. So if somebody sends you a hyperlink in an email, it goes to Proofpoint. Proofpoint actually changes the link so that if you click on the link that's in the email when it comes into your inbox, it goes out to Proofpoint. Proofpoint actually detonates the email link right there and sees if there's malicious code running. And if there's malicious code running on any of the pages that are linked in that email, then Proofpoint will block it for you. So that's a really good and inexpensive protection. It's a couple bucks a month per user mailbox. Cloudflare, that one's for web application and website protection. They do inbound denial of service and web application filtering. They are super useful for keeping your website up and available. If you know your website gets targeted for a hack, they're also great as a second line of defense against, like, if you have a WordPress site, you have to keep your WordPress up to date. You have to set all the security baselines for WordPress or whatever other hosting utility you use. but Cloudflare can also add it's like another layer of protection against malicious code running on your website. KnowBe4 is another company that we partner with. They do user training, security awareness, and really clever phishing tests. Phishing is when you send an email that tries to trick somebody into putting in their credentials or doing something that they're not supposed to do that's in violation of the security policy. And they do a brilliant job of gathering metrics on your users and saying, here's a user, here's what they're susceptible to, and here's the training that you should target toward them. Here's the website for Have I Been Pwned? Have I Been Pwned is a gigantic database of the most notorious breaches that are out there. I'm going to spoil this and say there's a high likelihood that almost all of us have been pwned because most people use Facebook or LinkedIn or any one of the other gajillion services that have suffered breaches and loss of data and loss of credentials. There's some of these password managers actually have real-time credential checking built into them, so they will tell you in real time if the username and password that you're entering into them is in the breach database. That's really useful because again, everybody's email, generally speaking, has been is likely to have been caught up in one of these breaches. So these are the five takeaways from this. I'm close to the end. I have one more slide. Don't trust email. Email is not a place to send sensitive data or receive it. You should never send financial documents. You should never send things like social security numbers or medical data or any of that over email. Do use a password manager. Super important. It is just not feasible to keep track of all the accounts that we have. I have 150 entries anyway in my password manager just for my personal accounts. Don't trust callers. Don't give information out on inbound calls. Ask for a ticket number. Call the organization back through a published phone number. This one's an easy one. Don't give out personal information. Facebook quizzes and all of these things that are all over the internet that say, check your IQ, do all this stuff, whatever, all of that stuff. Those are all information farms. All they really are wanting to do is grab your personal information. And the more of it that you give up, the more likely that somebody can send a really targeted attack your way. Take a pause, think before you act. That one's really important. Don't let high pressure work to the attacker's advantage. So if you're feeling uncomfortable, if something feels off, then just hang up and take a beat. If it's important, they'll call you back. If it's an attacker, they'll call you back and they'll be more grumpy about it. And that's a pretty clear sign that that it's not actually a legit call. So some of those graphics that I used at the beginning of the slide came out of the Verizon data breach incident report from last year. So I've linked that here. Some of the other statistics, these are the graphics that I borrowed. I sourced them here. NPR has a really interesting article on the big tech crackdown on the Russian propaganda. One of the points that I didn't make is that when Facebook and Instagram cut off a whole bunch of the Russia bots that were out there pushing the pro-war, anti-Ukraine propaganda. One of the interesting takeaways was that a whole bunch of anti-vax and anti-mask propaganda also dropped off. So there's a high correlation of, it doesn't matter what the dis and misinformation is, there's a high correlation to the source. Okay, and that gets to the most important slide, the last one. which is where I say thanks very much for your attention and ask for questions and comments and all of that stuff.